I stood in the back of that church, my hands trembling so hard I had to clutch the edge of a pew just to keep myself from falling. The music was soft, the kind they play at weddings to make everything sound like a dream. But to me, it felt like a funeral march. My mother walked down the aisle in a white dress, her face glowing with happiness. And the man waiting for her at the altar was my husband. The world stopped making sense in that moment. My husband, my mother, their wedding day. People talk about heartbreak like it's something you can describe, like it's just pain in your chest or tears that won't stop. But the truth is, heartbreak isn't loud. It's quiet. It's standing in a room full of people who are smiling and clapping while you feel your soul slowly collapsing inside of you. It's pretending to breathe when every breath feels like a lie. You think you know betrayal? You don't. Not until you've seen the two people who shaped your world, the two people you trusted with your life, look each other in the eyes and promise forever, while your heart lies broken on the church floor. My name is Grace Miller, and this is the story of how my world fell apart in the most impossible way, and how I found the strength to rise again, not with vengeance, but with truth. Because sometimes, the only revenge worth having is peace. Before we begin, let me tell you something. When betrayal comes, it doesn't crash through your door. It creeps in like a shadow, soft and silent, while you're still smiling and thinking your life is beautiful. And when you finally notice it, it's already everywhere. 3 months before that wedding, I was still living in what I thought was happiness. I was 34, married to Ethan, my college sweetheart. We'd been together for 8 years, the kind of couple people called solid. We had a nice home in Charleston, South Carolina, a quiet street lined with magnolia trees, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. I worked as a school counselor at the local middle school. Ethan ran a small but growing construction business. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I cooked dinner every evening. We watched shows together, and on weekends we took long drives just to talk. I thought we had love. I truly did. My mother, Elaine, lived 2 towns over. She was 56, still radiant, elegant, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made people straighten their posture. She'd had me young, just 21, and for most of my life, she'd been my best friend. After my father left when I was 10, it was just the two of us. She worked hard, rebuilt her life, and made sure I never felt the absence of a family. She was my everything. At least I thought she was. It started small, the changes in Ethan. They always start small. He stopped touching me. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way. Just little things. He stopped hugging me from behind when I was cooking. Stopped reaching for my hand while driving. Stopped saying, "I love you," unless I said it first. At first, I blamed stress. His business was expanding. He'd been landing bigger clients, staying up late answering calls, checking emails at midnight. He said he was just tired, and I believed him, because love makes you believe the best, even when the worst is staring you in the face. But then, there was the phone. Oh, that phone became my rival. He guarded it like a secret, always face down, always within reach. At dinner, it would buzz, and his eyes would light up. That smile, the one I hadn't seen in weeks, would appear out of nowhere, warm and alive. And then it would vanish the moment I asked, "Who's that?" He'd shrug, "Just a client." Always just a client. I laughed it off at first. I told myself not to be paranoid. But deep down, something shifted. I could feel him slipping away, and I didn't know how to pull him back. Then my mother started visiting more often. She'd always been involved in our lives, but lately she seemed more present. She'd drop by with homemade casseroles or bottles of wine. "Just checking in," she'd say, smiling. And every time she came, Ethan seemed to perk up a little. He'd talk more, laugh more, pour her a glass of wine before I even thought to offer. I noticed it, but I told myself I was imagining things, because who wants to think like that about their own mother? One evening, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, except for the sound of low laughter from the kitchen. I walked in and saw Ethan and my mother sitting close, sharing a joke over coffee. When they saw me, they both straightened a little too quickly. "Oh, Grace, you're home early," my mother said, her tone too bright. Ethan nodded, smiling like nothing was strange. "Elaine just stopped by to drop off dinner. We were talking about the new deck plans." I forced a smile, even as my chest tightened. "That's nice," I said softly. "You two seem to be getting along well." My mother chuckled. "Well, your husband's a great listener. You're lucky, sweetheart." I nodded, pretending to agree, but something inside me twisted. That night, I lay awake, listening to Ethan's breathing beside me. I stared at the ceiling and told myself I was crazy. My mother loved me. Ethan loved me. There was no reason to doubt that. Right? But once doubt enters your heart, it doesn't leave easily. The next few weeks, I started noticing little things. When I mentioned my mother's name, Ethan's tone softened. He complimented her cooking. "Your mom makes the best pot roast." He started suggesting we invite her to dinner more often. Once, I caught him humming while shaving, and when I asked what was so funny, he said, "Just something your mom said the other day." He couldn't even remember what it was, but he smiled like he was remembering something warm. That smile wasn't mine anymore, and I knew it. The hardest part about losing someone's love isn't the moment they leave. It's all the moments leading up to it, when you know they're already gone but they're still pretending to stay. My mother started dressing differently too. She'd always been elegant, but lately she was trying harder. Brighter lipstick, lower necklines, more perfume. When I mentioned it, she laughed. "Grace, I'm not dead yet. A woman should always feel beautiful." I laughed with her, but my laughter sounded hollow. One afternoon, I stopped by her house unannounced. Her car was in the driveway. Ethan's wasn't, or so I thought. But when I looked closer, I saw his truck parked 2 houses down, half hidden behind a tree. My heart skipped. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe he was visiting a client nearby. But still, I knocked. No answer. I called her phone. It went to voicemail. Something in me went cold. That evening, when I asked Ethan where he'd been, he said, "Client meeting." He didn't even blink. And that's when I realized, liars don't always stumble. The best ones tell their lies the way they tell the truth. Calm, steady, convincing. Days passed, and the distance between us grew like a silent canyon. He started working late. He smelled different when he came home. Not perfume, but something else. Something that didn't belong to me. He avoided my eyes when he spoke. He hugged me out of habit, not love. And every time I tried to reach him, I felt like I was hugging a ghost. My mother, meanwhile, kept asking questions. "How are things between you two?" she'd ask, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I'd smile and say, "We're fine." She'd nod, touching my hand. "You're strong, Grace." You'll be okay no matter what happens. I didn't understand what she meant then, but I would soon. One night, as I was cleaning the kitchen, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He was in the shower. I told myself not to look. I told myself I trusted him, but trust had already left me. I glanced at the screen. The name that flashed there made my world tilt. Mom. I froze. My breath caught. I told myself there had to be an explanation. She was my mother. He probably saved her number with a heart as a joke, right? I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But that night when he went to bed, I checked again. I waited until he fell asleep, then unlocked his phone. His password was his birthday. I already knew that. There it was. Text after text. Messages that started, "Innocent, dinner was great tonight. Thanks for listening." Then they changed. "I can't stop thinking about you. I miss your touch. I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it." And her replies, "My sweet Ethan, we'll figure it out." My vision blurred. My heart stopped. I read until my hands shook too much to hold the phone. There were photos, nothing explicit, but enough. A hand on a cheek, a smile that didn't belong to me. I sat in the dark for hours, listening to him breathe, wondering how I'd missed it. The two people I loved most in this world, whispering behind my back, building something out of my broken trust. The silence in that room was heavier than any scream. And in that silence, I made a promise to myself. I would not shout. I would not cry. I would let them think I was blind, for now, because the worst kind of revenge isn't loud or angry. It's quiet. It's patient. It's letting people dig their own graves while you stand there with a calm smile, knowing the truth. That night was the beginning of the end. And I didn't even know how deep the ending would go. For days after I found the messages, I moved through the house like a ghost. I did all the same things I had always done. I made coffee in the morning. I folded the laundry. I smiled when neighbors waved. But inside I was breaking into 1,000 quiet pieces. When Ethan left for work, he still kissed my cheek. The gesture was automatic, soft, quick, like touching a familiar picture. I let him do it. I wanted him to see me as normal. I wanted him to believe I hadn't seen anything. I learned to be calm on the surface. Calm is a good disguise. I started keeping notes. I wrote down times he left the house. I saved screenshots of the messages. I put receipts in a folder. I wanted proof that I was not making this up in my head. Proof makes indecision shrink. Proof gives you a map when the road seems covered. At first, I thought about confronting them. I pictured walking into the kitchen and slamming the phone on the table. I imagined words flying, accusations, crying, a loud, dramatic end. I wanted that moment of release. But the truth is, confrontation feeds chaos. It makes people defensive. It gives them room to lie louder. I chose a quieter path. I began to watch more closely. Not in a way that made me cruel, but in a way that let me see the truth plainly. I noticed small routines. How Elaine arrived at certain hours, how she lingered when she thought I was out, how Ethan would take calls outside the house, out of earshot, how the lines between them formed a pattern. One afternoon, I found a lipstick mark on a coffee mug, a faint smudge at the rim. It was not mine. I rinsed the mug, set it aside, and watched for who used it next. When Ethan reached for it, he paused, then put it in the sink without a word. He moved like someone who knows the ground may shift under his feet any second. My mother's visits increased. Sometimes she came just to borrow sugar or drop off a book. She would sit at my kitchen table and smooth the tablecloth with her hands, and we would talk about trivial things. She never mentioned the messages. She never once looked at me as if she might be standing on a cracking floor. There were moments of normalcy that were worse than the lies. Once, we all laughed over a stupid commercial on TV. I felt my throat tighten while my mother reached across the couch to touch Ethan's arm. That touch was casual for her. For me, it was a knife wrapped in silk. I said nothing. I smiled and laughed like I was acting in a play I did not choose. I started going through old photos. I looked for signs. I wanted to prove to myself that this was not all in my head. In photographs, they looked ordinary. Family dinners, holidays, vacations. On camera, betrayal hides behind smiles. I found a picture from last summer. Elaine leaning close to Ethan while I poured drinks. It looked innocent. It looked like a normal mother and son-in-law moment. But now it felt like a memory coated in glass. At school, I kept my face calm for the students. They needed me. I sat in my small office and listened to their worries about math tests and friends. Helping them felt like breathing. Some nights I came home exhausted and sat on the porch until the streetlights blinked on. The sky over Charleston was wide and black, and the sound of the crickets felt like fingers tapping on my ribs. I told myself I would not let this break me. I told myself there would be a way back to life. But I also began to plan. Not a plan for violence or revenge, that was never me. My plan was simple: to protect myself, my future, and my dignity. To make sure the truth did not get buried under their pretty words. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in family law. I told her I needed information. I did not say everything. I did not want anyone to know the whole map yet. The lawyer asked questions about assets, about our mortgage, about joint accounts. She spoke plainly, kindly. That call made me feel less alone. It gave me a legal frame to hold on to when my world felt like water. One night, I drove to my mother's house. I told myself I was dropping off a casserole like I always did. Really, I wanted to see how she would greet me. When she opened the door, she looked happier than she had in months. Her makeup was small but perfect. She hugged me tightly and smelled of a perfume I had never worn. Not that it mattered. I brought up a casual story about the school fundraiser. She listened, then smiled, and her eyes darted to the hallway where a framed photo of Ethan and me hung. For a second, she looked guilty. Then she blinked and laughed it away. "Grace, you look tired," she said. "Sit. Have some tea." We sat at her kitchen table and I watched her hands. They were steady. She handed me a cup and asked about my week. I told her about a student who had won a small scholarship. Her face was warm. For a moment, I wanted to believe it could all be fixed. But when I casually said, "You and Ethan have been spending a lot of time together," she shrugged. "We all need family," she said. "He's been under pressure with work. I'm just helping." I wanted to ask her how she could help in the way she was helping. I wanted to say, "How could you choose him over me?" But the words stuck to my tongue like glue. Instead, I sipped my tea and watched the steam rise. Steam softens sharp edges, I thought, and that is how I kept from breaking in front of her. The house felt like a stage where everyone knew their parts. My mother played the concerned parent. Ethan played the busy husband. I played the dutiful wife who kept her mouth shut. But off stage, the truth hummed like an undercurrent. At the end of that week, Ethan told me he was going out of town for a job estimate. He kissed me goodbye at the door and promised he'd be back late. I watched him drive away, feeling like I was watching someone leave my life, piece by piece. I sat at the table and opened a bottle of wine I had been saving. I poured a small glass, then called my friend, Lena, and told her I needed to talk. Lena arrived with a warm casserole and an armful of concern. She sat with me on the couch and listened as I told her the story in small, careful pieces. When I read the messages out loud, her face went white. She reached for my hand and said, "Grace, you have to be careful. This is not small." She looked at me with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You don't have to face this alone." Her words were like oil on a rough wound. I had been isolating myself, letting the betrayal form a private prison. Having someone else in that room made the prison feel less claustrophobic. We planned small things together: who I could call, what I should document, where to store my important papers. She reminded me I was not wrong for feeling betrayed. A turning moment came when I overheard a conversation that ended with quiet laughter. I had gone into the garage to get a toolbox, and the garage door was half up. Through the window, I saw Ethan and my mother in the backyard, sitting close on a bench beneath the magnolia tree. They were talking, heads bent. Then laughter, soft and intimate. It was a sound I had not heard them share with me for months. I backed away slowly, and for the first time, my hands shook in a way that could not be hidden. I felt like an intruder in my own life. For years, I had been the person people turned to for comfort. Now, every step I took in my home felt like trespassing. After that, I started leaving little notes. Harmless things, reminders about bills, notes on the fridge about who should bring what to a family dinner. I would watch them pick up the notes and sometimes trace a finger over my handwriting. I wanted to leave evidence that I cared, that I was there. It felt ridiculous, but those small marks of presence steadied me. One evening, Ethan walked in the door earlier than usual. He came into the kitchen and froze. My mother was there, sitting at the table with a rosé in front of her. "Grace," she said, with the bright warmth she used when neighbors visited. "You're home early." Ethan's face was calm. He kissed my mother on the cheek in a way that made something inside me thud. Later, when we were alone in the bedroom, I turned to him and said, "Are you leaving?" He looked at me with tired sympathy. "What do you mean?" "You're distant," I said. "You're somewhere else," he sighed. "I'm stressed, Grace, between the business and—" He stopped himself. "I can't keep walking on eggshells. You need to stop being so suspicious." Those words hit me like a cold rain. He spoke as if I were the one causing this. He made his absence my problem. It was a skillful move. Blame is a powerful shield. That night I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the dark outline of the magnolia tree. I thought about the word family and how it was being rewritten under my feet. I thought about the choices people make when they leave love. I thought about how some people can carry two lives at once like a secret, hoping no one notices until it becomes too late. The rising conflict in my life was not a single explosion. It was a series of small collapses. Each small thing, a laugh, a smell, a whispered message, chipped away at the life I had known. I learned to move carefully, to document quietly, to keep my heart steady when my world seemed to be tilting. And through it all, a strange calm settled over me. Not peace exactly, more like a clear-eyed focus. I began to understand that sometimes the only way to survive is to watch, to wait, and to collect the truth like stones in a jar. You can carry those stones later when you are ready. By the time the day of their wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox, the stones in my jar were heavy. I opened the envelope with hands that did not tremble this time. My mother had signed it with the sweetest little note. "Hope to see you there, Grace. Love, Mom." The word love hit me with an unfamiliar shape. I folded the invitation and placed it on the counter. I could not decide if I would go. Part of me wanted to stand in that church and watch the faces of the two people who had failed me. Part of me wanted to burn the invitation and never see them again. I kept the invitation on the counter for days. It seemed a small, quiet test. Some decisions you make when the ground is collapsing tell you who you are. And in that moment, I did not know who I would be. But I did know this. I would not let them write my ending for me. The morning after I received that wedding invitation, I woke before dawn. The world outside was still. That quiet blue hour when the sun hasn't yet decided to rise. I sat by the window with my cup of coffee, watching the light crawl over the horizon. The invitation lay open on the kitchen table. White paper, gold lettering. My mother's handwriting curling at the bottom like a signature of finality. I ran my fingers over the embossed names. Elaine Thompson and Ethan Miller. I whispered them aloud and the sound felt unreal. I thought, how does a person do this? How does a man look at the woman who raised his wife and decide he can build a future with her instead? There was no answer. Only silence. Thick, familiar silence. I didn't cry. The tears had dried weeks ago. What remained was something colder. Acceptance. I had spent too long pretending not to see the truth. Now that it was fully visible, it almost felt like relief. Painful, yes, but honest. And I could work with honesty. That week, I took a few days off from work. I told my supervisor I needed personal time. She nodded with understanding. Maybe she could see it in my eyes. The kind of tired that sleep can't fix. While Ethan was at the office, I packed some of my things. Just the essentials. Clothes, documents, my mother's old jewelry box. Ironic, considering what it had come to mean. I didn't tell him I was leaving yet. I just wanted to feel how it felt to put distance between myself and that house. Before I closed the bedroom door, I looked around once more. The pictures on the dresser, the smell of cedar from his cologne, the bed we'd shared for nearly a decade. Memories linger in rooms long after love leaves. I stayed with Lena for a few nights. Her spare room was small but warm. She cooked me dinner and we sat together in the evenings without talking much. Sometimes silence is the kindest gift. On the third night, Ethan called. I let it ring twice before answering. Grace? His voice was careful, almost polite. Yeah. You've been gone for a few days. Everything okay? I stared at the ceiling. Everything's fine. I didn't know if you were mad or something. Why would I be mad? I asked softly. He hesitated. I don't know. You just seem distant. Distant. The word tasted bitter. Maybe you just didn't notice until now. He sighed. Can we talk when you get home? Sure, I said. We'll talk. When I hung up, I told Lena I was going back the next morning. She offered to come with me, but I said no. Some things you have to do alone. The next day, the house looked the same as I'd left it. Too clean, too calm. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, like nothing had changed. He smiled when he saw me. Hey, he said. Hey! He reached for my hand, but I didn't take it. He frowned slightly. Grace, what's going on? I took a deep breath. I know. He blinked. Know what? I know about you and my mother. The silence that followed was louder than any scream could have been. His fingers froze around the mug. For a second, his expression faltered, just a flash. Then he straightened. Grace, whatever you think you know, I cut him off. Don't insult me with lies. I've seen the messages. I know everything. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The color drained from his face. Finally, he said, It just happened. We didn't mean for it to... I laughed softly, though it didn't sound like laughter. Things like that don't just happen, Ethan. They're choices. Repeated ones. He looked down at his hands. You don't understand. Your mom and I... We connected. You and I had drifted apart. She was there for me. She was there for you? I repeated. She was my mother, Ethan. The one person in this world who should have protected me from pain, not joined you in causing it. He flinched. His voice broke a little when he said, I didn't want to hurt you. You did anyway. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, slow and rhythmic, like it was counting the seconds of a life dissolving. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. "I love her, Grace. I'm going to marry her." The words landed like cold stones. I stood perfectly still. "Then do it," I said quietly. "But don't expect my blessing. You already took enough from me." I turned to leave. He reached out, his voice shaking. "Grace, please!" I stopped at the doorway. "You made your choice, Ethan. Now live with it." I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently behind me. That night, I drove to the beach. The air smelled of salt and rain. I walked barefoot along the sand until the water touched my feet. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, but stillness, the kind that comes when the storm has already passed and all that's left is debris. Days turned into weeks. I filed for divorce quietly. The lawyer handled most of it. Ethan didn't fight it. Maybe guilt made him compliant. Maybe he thought marrying my mother would erase the wrong somehow. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. Inside was a formal invitation to their wedding, this time sent to my new apartment. I stared at it for a long time. The rational part of me said I shouldn't go. Why witness another wound? But another part of me, the quiet, steady part that had endured everything, wanted to face it. Not for them, but for me. So I went. The church was small, the same one where Ethan and I had exchanged vows 9 years earlier. I wore a simple gray dress, no jewelry, no makeup. I sat in the back row, unnoticed at first. When the ceremony began, I watched them walk down the aisle. My mother in white lace, Ethan in a dark suit that looked too tight for him. Their faces glowed with the kind of happiness people wear when they're trying to convince themselves they're doing the right thing. As the pastor began to speak, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was simply empty. Watching them was like watching actors in a play I'd already seen 100 times. When it came time for the vows, Ethan's voice trembled. "I promise to love you," he said to my mother, "to be faithful, and to build a future together." Faithful. The word echoed through the church like thunder in a hollow cave. For a moment, my mother's eyes met mine across the room. The color drained from her face. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see me, really see me, one last time. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause. I stood quietly and walked out before the final blessing. Outside, the air was cool. I took a deep breath, looked up at the sky, and let the moment pass through me. I thought about all the years I'd spent loving people who hadn't loved me the same way. And I realized something. Sometimes closure isn't something you find. It's something you decide to give yourself. I didn't ruin their wedding day by causing a scene. I didn't shout or cry. I just left. But leaving, that was its own kind of ruin. After the ceremony, life moved on. They moved into a new house 1 town over. I heard bits and pieces from neighbors, how they were adjusting, how people whispered behind their backs. The story spread fast. Even in quiet places, gossip travels like wildfire. My mother called once, months later. Her voice was hesitant. "Grace, I'd like to see you." I said, "Why now?" "Because I miss you." I closed my eyes. "You didn't miss me when you took my life apart." She started crying softly. I made a mistake. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch until she finally whispered, "Can you ever forgive me?" I wanted to say yes, but forgiveness is a slow road. "Maybe one day," I said, "but not today." Then I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. But fate has its own timing. A year later, Ethan showed up at my office. I was finishing a counseling session when I saw him through the glass door. He looked thinner, older. Life had carved regret into the lines around his eyes. "Grace," he said, standing in the doorway. I nodded. "Ethan." He smiled weakly. "You look good. Thanks." "You don't." He chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fair." We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Your mom left," he said. "She moved out last month. Said she needed time to think." I looked at him, unsure what he wanted me to say. "I thought I could build something real with her," he continued, voice cracking. "But it's like everything I touch turns to ash." "You built it on lies," I said gently. "Things like that don't stand long," he nodded, his eyes glassy. "I miss you, Grace. Not because I want you back. I just miss the peace I had with you." I sighed. "You miss the version of yourself you were when you were with me." "That's not the same thing." He looked down, shame written across his face. "You were right to leave." "I know." He stood up slowly, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "I know that too." He walked away, shoulders slumped. And as I watched him leave, I realized that was the last time I'd ever see him. That night, I went home and sat by the window again, the same way I had the morning after I got the invitation. Only this time I wasn't holding pain. I was holding peace. They had ruined my marriage, yes, but I had survived. I had rebuilt a life without them. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all. I thought about Ethan then, probably sitting alone, wondering how everything he'd chased had turned into emptiness. And I thought about my mother, living with the consequences of her choices. In a strange way, I pitied them both. Because they'd each lost something they could never get back. My trust, my presence, and the quiet love that once filled their lives. The turning point in my story wasn't the moment I caught them. It wasn't the divorce or even their wedding. It was the moment I chose to let go. Completely. Because when you stop holding on to what broke you, that's when you start to heal. After that last meeting with Ethan, something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no breaking down. Just a quiet realization that I had finally stepped out of the shadow of what they did to me. For the first time in years, I could look at my reflection without flinching. I no longer saw the woman who had been betrayed. I saw someone who had survived it. The months that followed were calm, almost eerily so. My days became simple again, waking early, brewing coffee, feeding the stray cat that visited my porch. I filled the silence with small routines, little rituals that made me feel grounded. I'd go on long walks after dinner, watching the seasons change. The trees outside my apartment turned from green to gold, then to bare branches against the winter sky. It was strange how nature moved on without asking for permission. Maybe that's what I was learning to do too. Work kept me busy. I had always been a counselor at the local community center, helping people who'd lost their way. Now, I approached my sessions differently. I listened with more empathy, more patience. When someone cried about heartbreak or betrayal, I no longer tried to fix them with quick advice. I just sat with them in their pain. Because I knew, sometimes what people need most is someone who simply understands. One evening, after a long day at the center, I stopped by a small bakery near my apartment. The owner, Mrs. Harris, greeted me with her usual warmth. "Haven't seen you in a while, sweetheart," she said. "I've been busy," I smiled. She nodded knowingly. "Healing takes time." Her words stayed with me all night. Healing does take time, but it also takes choice. Every morning I woke up, I had to choose not to be bitter. About 6 months after Ethan's visit, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mother. The handwriting was familiar, though shakier than before. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a short note, barely a page long. Grace, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I regret everything. Ethan and I are no longer together. I've been living with your aunt in Michigan, trying to make sense of what I've done. Every night I think about you, about the daughter I hurt and the love I threw away. If you ever find it in your heart to speak to me again, I'll be waiting. I love you always. Mom, I read the letter 3 times. Each word felt like a small apology, wrapped in years of silence. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to send it back unopened. The old anger still whispered in the back of my mind. But another part of me, the part that had learned to breathe again, said softly, Grace, you don't have to hate her anymore. I didn't call her that day. I didn't even write back. I just placed the letter in my bedside drawer and sat quietly for a long while. Maybe forgiveness doesn't need to happen all at once. Maybe it can come in small, hesitant steps. A few weeks later, I saw Ethan again, though not in person this time. A mutual acquaintance told me he'd moved out of state for work, that he looked lonely, but calmer. I didn't feel satisfaction or revenge, just a gentle sense of distance, like watching a chapter of my life fade in the rearview mirror. My therapist once told me that closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from doing small things for yourself. So that's what I did. I repainted my apartment walls a soft cream color. I bought myself flowers every Sunday. I took a pottery class, even though I had no talent for it. I joined a book club, made new friends, and started volunteering at the local women's shelter. And little by little, I began to laugh again. Not the polite kind of laughter I'd forced before, but real, unguarded laughter, the kind that rises from somewhere deep. One afternoon, while walking by the park, I saw a young couple sitting on a bench, sharing ice cream and laughing at nothing in particular. For a brief moment, a pang of sadness hit me, a reminder of the love I once thought would last forever. But then I smiled, because I knew that even if I never found that kind of love again, I was still whole. A few months later, I decided to visit my mother. I didn't tell her I was coming. I just got in my car one Saturday morning and drove to Michigan. The road stretched endlessly before me, a long ribbon of quiet reflection. When I arrived, my aunt answered the door. She looked surprised but happy. "Grace?" she said softly, hugging me. "She'll be so glad you came." My mother was sitting in the living room, knitting something with trembling hands. When she looked up and saw me, the yarn fell to the floor. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Grace," she whispered, standing slowly. "You came!" I didn't know what to say. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. 2 women bound by blood and broken choices. Then I stepped forward and hugged her. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was a beginning. She cried quietly against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said over and over. "I know," I whispered. "I know, Mom." We spent the afternoon together talking about simple things. The weather, the neighbors, her garden. It was awkward at times, but underneath it all there was a small, fragile tenderness trying to grow again. Before I left, she handed me a small box. "This was yours?" she said. Inside was a locket, the same one she'd given me on my wedding day. I opened it. Inside were 2 tiny pictures, one of her, one of me, both smiling from a long time ago. I closed it carefully. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, tears still in her eyes. "I don't deserve it, but thank you for coming." On the drive home, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally made peace with the past. In the months that followed, I noticed something beautiful happening. I began to dream again. I started planning small trips, writing in a journal, and even thinking about going back to school for a degree in family therapy. It felt like a new chapter, one where I could use my pain for something meaningful. Sometimes people ask me how I managed to ruin their lives without revenge or cruelty. The truth is, I didn't need to. They did that on their own. When you betray love, it has a way of turning against you. My silence, my calm walking away, was the loudest lesson they could have received. A year after visiting my mother, she passed away quietly in her sleep. My aunt called me one morning, her voice trembling as she told me the news. I sat there in silence for a long time, the phone still in my hand. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was just grateful that before she left, we had that one peaceful day together. At her funeral, I stood beside her casket, looking at her still face. She looked fragile, almost like a child again. I whispered, "I forgive you, Mom." And I meant it. After the service, I walked outside. The sky was bright blue, and the air smelled like spring. I closed my eyes and felt a quiet warmth spread through me. Not joy, but peace. As for Ethan, I never saw him again. But sometimes I wonder if he ever found what he was looking for. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it no longer mattered to me. My life wasn't tied to his anymore. What mattered was that I had learned how to stand on my own again, not with bitterness, but with quiet dignity. I had rebuilt my life from ashes, one breath at a time. I think about that often, how everything I lost made space for something new. How the worst pain I'd ever known became the soil for my healing. Now when people ask me if I believe in forgiveness, I say yes. But forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from it. It's choosing peace over punishment. Some nights I still sit by the window with a cup of coffee watching the stars. The house is silent, but it doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels full of lessons, of memories, of quiet strength. Sometimes I whisper to myself, "You made it, Grace." And I smile. It's been 3 years since everything fell apart. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times like it all happened just yesterday. The church, the whispers, the letter, the silence that followed. But when I look at my life now, I realize how much can change when you stop clinging to pain and start holding on to peace. I live in a small house on the edge of town. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel lonely. In the mornings, I sit on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a mug of coffee in my hands. The world wakes up slowly, birds singing, the wind brushing through the trees, and I just breathe. There's a beauty in stillness I never noticed before. My neighbors are kind. There's Mrs. Cooper, who bakes pies for everyone during holidays, and Mr. Franklin, who never forgets to wave when I'm watering my plants. They don't know my story, not really. They just know me as Grace, the woman who volunteers at the shelter and loves flowers. And maybe that's all I need to be now. Sometimes, though, the past comes back in quiet flashes, like when I hear a song Ethan used to play in the car, or when I see an older woman helping her daughter choose wedding flowers. For a moment, a small ache stirs in my chest, but it fades quickly. I don't push it away. I let it pass through me like wind through an open window. Healing doesn't mean you forget. It means the memories stop hurting the same way. There was a time I used to ask myself why they did it. Why my mother, who raised me with love, chose to betray me in the cruelest way possible. Why Ethan, the man who once swore to protect me, chose her instead. I thought if I could find an answer, it would make the pain smaller. But life doesn't always give you reasons. Some wounds just happen, and all you can do is decide how to live after them. I used to think revenge would bring peace, that seeing them suffer would somehow make up for everything I lost. But standing here now, I realized that revenge never heals the heart. It only ties you tighter to the hurt. The real victory was walking away with my soul still gentle. Ethan reached out to me once about a year ago. He sent an email. Just a few lines saying he was sorry, that he thought about me often, that he hoped I was happy. I never replied. Not because I hated him, but because I had nothing left to say. He made his choice, and I made mine, to let go. Forgiveness isn't something you owe to those who wronged you. It's something you give to yourself when you're tired of carrying the past like a weight on your chest. If you asked me now what I learned from it all, I'd say this. Love can be beautiful, but it's never meant to cost you your peace. The moment it does, it's no longer love, it's captivity. And when you free yourself, no matter how much it hurts, you give your heart a chance to breathe again. My mother's death still lingers quietly in my heart. I miss what we could have been, the late-night phone calls, the laughter, the holidays together. But I've stopped wishing for a different past. I've accepted that love and pain can exist side by side, and that sometimes the people we love most are the ones who teach us the hardest lessons. On her birthday last year, I visited her grave. I brought yellow roses and her favorite. I sat there for a long time, talking softly like she could still hear me. "I'm doing okay, Mom," I said. "I think you'd be proud. I still miss you, but I'm learning to smile again." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I felt something warm on my face, like sunlight breaking through the clouds. I took it as her way of saying she was sorry one more time. As I drove home that day, I realized something I'd never said out loud before. I had finally forgiven both of them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. That night, I made tea, sat by the window, and opened my old journal. I flipped through the pages, the angry ones, the grieving ones, the hopeful ones, and smiled. The story written there wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about becoming. I wrote one last entry that night. I once believed that love could break you beyond repair. But I was wrong. Love can hurt, yes, but the absence of love, the silence after betrayal, that's where you discover your own strength. I don't hate them anymore. I don't wish for revenge. I just hope they found their own lessons. Because I found mine. I closed the journal and felt a strange calm wash over me. Life didn't give me the ending I wanted, but it gave me the one I needed. One where I learned that closure isn't something others hand to you. It's something you create with your own two hands, piece by piece, day by day. These days, when I help women at the shelter who are lost, I tell them, don't let your pain define you. Let it shape you. They often ask me how I know that. I just smile and say, because I've lived it. If I've learned anything from my story, it's that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. And as for Ethan, wherever he is, I hope he finally understands the weight of what he did. I don't wish him misery, but I do wish him clarity. The kind that comes too late. The kind that lingers when you realize the best thing you ever had was the one you threw away. People often ask if I ever loved him after all that. The truth is, a small part of me always will. You can't erase years of love overnight. But love changes form. It becomes memory, lesson, and eventually peace. So yes, the ending was sad, especially for him. Because while I moved forward, he stayed trapped in the ruins of what he broke. And that, I think, is the real tragedy. As for me, I'm still here. Still learning. Still healing. Still believing that kindness, even after betrayal, is its own kind of revenge. And if you're listening to this and you've been hurt, I want you to remember something. You can rebuild. You can survive. And one day you'll wake up and realize that the pain no longer controls you. It only reminds you of how far you've come, because no matter what they took from you, they can never take your ability to rise again. That's my story, not of destruction, but of quiet resurrection. My name is Grace Matthews, and this was the truth about what happens when love turns into betrayal, and how, somehow, even after all that, I found my way back to peace. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every message you share reminds me that these stories don't just belong to one person. They belong to all of us who have felt love, loss, and forgiveness in some way. If you'd like to listen to more stories like this one, simply click on the video that's appearing on the right side of your screen. Each story carries its own lesson, its own quiet strength, and perhaps something that speaks to a part of your own journey too. And if you'd like to support this channel and help me continue bringing more real and meaningful stories to life, you can send a super thanks in the comments. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and your kindness allows me to share even more voices that deserve to be heard.